Welcome to The Green Fix. In this podcast, we explore how businesses are navigating a changing world through the lens of supply chains, sustainability, and tech.
Before we get started, we'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet today and pay our respects to elders past and present.
So today's guest, Nic Seton, is the CEO of Parents for Climate. You would have heard of Nic and his organization successfully leading the landmark greenwashing federal court case against EnergyAustralia, which has sent a massive market signal regarding offsets and corporate claims. He deeply understands the intersection of grassroots power, climate preparedness, and the personal reality of corporate employees who are navigating the dichotomy of being both sustainability professionals, workers, and parents. He is the perfect guest to bridge strict ESG compliance with the human element of sustainability work. So Nic, welcome to The Green Fix.
Thanks for having me.
We are delighted to host you today. So Nic, can you first tell us a little bit about you and how you came to be the CEO of Parents for Climate?
My background is in environmental campaigning. I've been doing it for a long time, but it wasn't until I became a dad while I was working at Greenpeace that I started to see a lot of the work I was doing through the perspective of my own child. And I know that sounds a little bit corny, like, of course, we want to make sure the kids are all right, but actually it came home pretty hard during the Black Summer bushfires where we were dealing with smoke every day, 90 days of smoke. We didn't see the blue sky. And he was only 3 years old at the time, and he had a pretty hard time breathing, so much so that we couldn't keep him safe. He wasn't safe at home because we just couldn't keep the smoke out. It wasn't safe at childcare because they couldn't keep the smoke out. And they would call us and say, hey, you have to come and get him. He's having trouble breathing and there's nothing we can do. And we'd have to rush into hospital. And that just became so, well, first of all, paralyzing and confronting, but also deeply personal. And I realized that this wasn't unique to me. This was something that nearly every family in Australia was thinking and feeling at the time. And we now know through the Bushfire Royal Commission that up to 450 people may have died as a result of just the smoke pollution from that event alone. Luckily and thankfully, he's okay now, but it really goes to show that parenting during this worsening climate crisis is actually pretty serious and pretty real and inescapable in so many ways. There's no way to predict it, and in some ways, there's no way to control it. I realized that in that moment, there was this enormous motivation from me personally and our family to do as much as we could and everything possible to make the world safer for him. And I think that's something that we've discovered is true of nearly every parent we've spoken to.
It's definitely one of those events that had such far-reaching consequences across so many different communities. I'm very glad that he's doing well now. How then did that lead into you working with Parents for Climate?
Yes, it was in that time that I actually decided to take a year off to look after my son. And this organization came up on my radar, and I realized that it was exactly what I was looking for in that moment of crisis. I went along to a community meeting of volunteers in the thick smoke of the bushfire haze, and everyone was just asking, what can we do? There's so many of us here. We've got so many networks and so many resources. What can we do? Parents for Climate was just the buzzword in that room because there were all these families. This was at the Petersham Bolo in Sydney. You could barely see across the bowling green because of the smoke, but there was so much energy in the room. And it gave me this excitement that I hadn't felt for campaigning on environment for some time because there was something new happening. And that was the beginning of a new story. This has arrived, it's now here, and we are dealing with it in our own homes. What are we going to do together? And that was really exciting. When I saw the opportunity to jump on board as CEO, I went for it. I'm the second CEO. The founders were an amazing group of mums who connected largely online from all across the country. And it's been 5 years since we've been building along the way, and we've had a lot of wins to show for it. But we're only just getting started. We're scratching the surface on what I think is the true potential of a story and a response to climate that is much more grounded in who we are and the love that we have for our own families.
Yeah, what a beautiful story. And if you had to define Parents for Climate, how would you describe the organization?
We're here to empower every parent to secure a safe climate for every child. And we do that by building capacity and equipping parents with resources to speak to their own communities, to speak to the media, and to speak to their elected representatives. And that's at every level of government. And now we're, in every electorate, we've got 26 volunteer local action groups all over the country, got about 26,000 supporters, and we're growing. It turns out parents are about every 2 and 3 voters. So it's an enormous potential pool of influence And we think we can use that constructively by having this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've mentioned a key word there a few times, which is local, and in particular, local action groups.
I think local action groups are our word for really just describing the networks of parents that already exist. Parents are incredibly well networked. In some ways, the social fabric of Australia. You've got the sports clubs, sports teams, and school groups and mums groups and play groups. Asking those people to have a conversation about resilience might sound like, let's talk about how we can swap clothes, toys, and books across our community, which we're seeing take off as an activity across all of our networks. And in some places, like in the Blue Mountains, they've been running that activity for several years. They're now being funded by the local council to keep building it. It's being used by hundreds and hundreds of families that all come to Katoomba every quarter to swap the resources amongst their own communities, find cost of living solutions, and also have a conversation about sustainability and climate. And those are just some of the ways that we are trying to meet parents where they are now, rather than asking them to take on another to-do list, because that's just not going to work.
Yeah, and it's very easy to make assumptions as to why parents would be interested in this, but we'd love to hear from you in terms of this demographic. Like you said, 2 out of 3 voters, so enmeshed across local communities already. What do you find makes them such an engaged community that make up Parents for Climate?
I think we live in a world where we're not recognized for our full selves in a lot of our places and spaces. When we go to work, we're not necessarily going to work as a parent and identifying as a parent, but actually being seen to be who you are, to be someone who is a caregiver, someone who's providing for a family, someone who has those responsibilities, and connecting with others, feeling a sense of belonging and collective identity and responsibility is something that a lot of parents, when we talk to them, say, oh, that's absolutely why I came to this organization, because this is a group where I feel understood and I feel like I can have conversations about things that concern me or that I don't know much about without feeling embarrassed, or like I might be trying to put my other social or work circles into a difficult conversation. So absolutely, giving people space to be parents, I think, is really meaningful, especially in a world where we're trying to be so many things at once, and being a parent is non-negotiable. It is, at the end of the day, what everyone is working towards. We want the best outcomes for our kids, and we hold them tight and want to protect them. But we are willing to let them go so long as they go toward opportunity. We see it in all the movies and all the books, right? It's about looking after and defending and security, but also supporting them to have opportunity and potential. And that's when we let go, and that's when we allow our children out into the world. But we're not going to do that if it's not safe. And we know that there's a lot of headwinds, not just climate, but it's one of those many meta crises that is interlinked with other issues that's very hard to deal with at the household level. Linking up and essentially collectivizing, being part of a bigger picture conversation and movement is very empowering to a lot of parents as well.
We're really interested in understanding this relationship between bringing your true self and the person you are at work and the role that you play within your organization. And one thing that we were considering as we were preparing for this interview is understanding how business leaders can leverage the workforce that they have, in particular that parenting workforce, to build a culture of climate action inside an organization, one culture that is genuine and it goes from inside out. Do you think that there's a relationship between the two?
It's such an awesome question. The key word in there is ultimately coming down to a reciprocity, and a reciprocity of values. In practice, that looks like working out how a company and how a workforce and how a community of parents within an organization are building and contributing to a coherent and clear picture that is the story they want to create for their own kids. We're all participating in creating tomorrow. We're all participating in creating the future. Every company is participating in creating that world. Some are doing some harm knowingly and trying to address it. And I think that's a really key part of that story, getting on top of the difficult to manage stuff and really putting forward the solutions and moving towards the point in time in which you know you're creating a much better outcome, not just for stakeholders you can't see in the community at large, but also the kids that are going to inherit the pollution and the economic conditions and all of the consequences of the productivity of that organization. If we don't have very genuine approaches to creating a story that feels meaningful and not just provides purpose to the individual, but visible positive outcomes to communities and to stakeholders and to workers and their families, then it's going to be a tough ride for that organization, because that's a very high standard that a lot of people are starting to apply. It's also something that can't just be a comms exercise. You need to be able to demonstrate how the organization exists towards creating a better tomorrow, whether that's reducing pollution or replacing and substituting more harmful products or improving technology. Those are all things that we need to be able to make tangible. Otherwise, the comms exercise will fall flat very quickly. That's something that a lot of parents are really looking for. We often use this thing called the kids test. We don't have a pub test because kids can't go to the pub. And that is basically a better off overall test. Is what we're doing going to create an outcome that is better off overall for kids? And that is a pretty simple test. It's one that I wish all companies and all governments would apply to every decision, but it's one that parents want to see applied. They know that they want to be creating a world that their kids, no matter how old, and they do get to a stage where they do challenge and ask this question, they want to know that they have a proud answer, that they can be proud of what they're doing and how they're working in such a way with a company towards a better answer to whatever the questions their kids have to ask about the future.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating how often the topic of legacy comes up on this podcast. It's a fascinating time, as you said, because the lessons of the past can't necessarily provide the roadmap that we need for the future, but we're already starting to see over the horizon a little bit. And we mentioned at the top the EnergyAustralia case. We'd love if you could explain to the listener, why was it such a big deal and what are the outcomes that have already come from it?
Yeah, look, it was a big deal for us, like a plucky little grassroots organization, to go and sue the third largest energy company and the third largest polluter in Australia for greenwashing. And we were able to bring them to a very reasonable settlement where they essentially capitulated to all of the key points in our arguments and removed the offending products from their product list. Essentially, they were marketing coal and gas energy products to consumers and businesses as being carbon neutral and essentially cancelling out or negating the harmful effects of those products. And the logic they were using was based on the Climate Active certification scheme and the use of carbon credits to essentially claim that this product was somehow good for the environment. These are all words that they were using and definitely one of the most clear examples of greenwashing in the energy space. It was the first greenwashing case against an energy company, and we really didn't know how it was going to go. And as I've learned, the wheels of justice do turn slowly, but we did get there in the end. It's a really big deal because it goes to the kids' test. It's about knowing better. Do we know better? And I think there are times when we look back and say, that might not have been the right thing to do, but at the time, that was what we thought was the best thing to do. But here and now, we know that fossil fuels simply can't be offset with carbon credits. There isn't some way of undoing the harm that is caused by burning coal and gas and then somehow moving numbers around on a spreadsheet, which may be funding worthwhile projects, either in Australia or other countries. That's not up for question. What's up for question is, does it undo the harm? No, it does not. And those aren't my words. Those are now the official statements of EnergyAustralia through this court case. And so we now have that from one of the biggest businesses in Australia that no, you cannot undo the harms of fossil fuels through carbon credits. That is a truth that we already knew, but now we know the company also knows better. And we believe they knew better all along. So I'm very glad to see that they have really improved as a company. And that's what we want to see. We want to see all companies setting the best possible standard and not waiting to be called out.
Yeah, it's such a huge win. And coming from a grassroots organization, the fact that you were able to take that on is just incredible. The key thing that you've said here is it's not about pointing a finger, it's about putting it back to the organization to do better. Yeah, fantastic win. Congratulations. I can't even imagine how incredible that must have felt.
Thanks.
And now that, you're on the other side of that and you're probably getting a lot of feedback from, individuals, markets, corporates, what shifts are you seeing in markets since then?
We've seen a huge shift in the energy retail sector. We've been mapping that closely and looking at what claims were being made by the other retailers and what are they saying after the case. And we've noticed about 15 companies have really moved forward and cleaned up their act. There's still a few who we think could do a little bit better, but on the whole, they are immediately implementing the outcomes of the case to the point where in some cases it's verbatim. They're actually repeating the exact language that we've seen EnergyAustralia come through with and putting that on their websites. I think that's important because it's making clear upfront to a consumer what is the statement, what is the claim that's being made, and how is it being justified, and if it's not justifiable, then unpacking that. In some cases, we're seeing some energy companies, some really otherwise very green and forward-thinking energy companies say things like, this is the best we can do right now. Our intention is to not use offsets at all. We're using them as a way of essentially not having a gap in accounting for the fact that the grid still has a majority of fossil fuel energy sources in the national energy market, for example. So we think there's been a huge movement. We also think that the culture of using offsets as just a license to pollute has officially ended in Australia. We're noticing that even airlines aren't doing the old, $1 to get rid of your guilt kind of product. It's fully qualified on the website and on the pages now, and that's good, because a lot of these carbon credit products do fund worthwhile projects, but they shouldn't be conflated with undoing pollution harm. And that's the important point that we've really tried to get across to business and to corporate and to government, is that we need to disaggregate credits from pollution. They're different things, and you can't substitute and use them as some kind of compensation. They're a contribution that a company can make. You can contribute to carbon credits, but you can't use carbon credits to wipe a balance sheet clean from pollution. That still exists, and we now have that on the record from Energy Australia. So yeah, really glad to see all these companies moving forward. We'd like to see them keep going. Obviously, it doesn't stop there. It's great to see climate strategies getting clearer and more evidence-based. Of course, we still have a long road to go, and we're not on top of this. We're not on top of emissions rising overall, particularly through exports in Australia, and we're not on top of the risk that is laid bare in the national risk assessment that our kids are going to have to deal with, and that's frankly unacceptable. And I think every company needs to be able to participate in the news story which addresses that, rather than waiting for someone else to move.
How would you like our listener to factor in the vulnerability that their organisation faces of extreme weather events as they're pulling together these immediate risk assessments?
The key activity that I'd really like to see become more mainstream, and if it's not already happening, many companies are already doing this. Some companies are actually going far beyond this, like the National Australia Bank is funding climate resilience work through its foundation. But not all companies are doing this. Smaller companies especially are sort of hoping that local government, state government and federal government are there to look after them. That's not necessarily going to work. And we've seen that play out time and time again in local communities when climate impacts are most severe or acute. They are left high and dry. Not for lack of care, but just simply because it exceeds our capacity and resources through governments or through communities. What we need to have a conversation about is preparation. We need to have a conversation about preparation in terms of what the business needs to do to prepare, supply chains, how that's going to affect their forecasts and so on. But also the people that work in those businesses need to be included in that conversation. And this is a really important conversation for two reasons. One, it doesn't just get us into the right mindset of being ready and therefore being more safe and more secure, but it also bypasses all of the noise around whether climate is a real thing and how much of a factor should it be, and just gets straight to pragmatics. What do we need to do to be safe and to adjust as a community and as a society? And we've seen through some of the random control tests in research on preparation as a conversation, as a discourse, that it can actually markedly shift people's stance on things like support for mitigation or support for curbing and phasing out fossil fuel use. It's just something we just need to move on and get onto. In the past, there's been a little bit of hesitation in the climate movement about talking about adaptation as if it's some kind of distraction or giving up or taking the eye off mitigation and the work that needs to be done there. I don't see it that way. I think they're no longer separate issues. They're the same thing. We need to be mitigating while we're preparing. And if we're not prepared, adaptation isn't really going to work, because we're already seeing that nearly all adaptation funding is going into resilience after the fact, helping people after disaster. And that's nowhere near as effective or efficient as being prepared in the first place. And, we should be able to mitigate enormous amounts of, social and property damage.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm actually glad you brought that up. And speaking of adaptation as well, the social impact of climate disasters. A lot of the times we have a deep focus on the E in ESG, the environmental side, but one that gets often overlooked is the social aspect. And I wonder if you have an opinion on how businesses can better support the social fabric of the communities in which they operate.
I think really being focused in place. If you're an organization that is based in a particular location or region, really understanding what's needed there and actually spending some time understanding what are the threats and hazards and also the most efficient use of resources is going to be so important. It's very easy to just say, here are some national or general approaches, but that's just not going to be as effective as really understanding what's going on in different places. Then looking at how can we support people to essentially build their confidence in this area. If it's not a conversation or a discourse that's already happening in the workforce or in the community, then I'd strongly encourage businesses to look at that and say, how are we getting ready for a changing climate? Because it's coming. And it's non-linear. So it's going to surprise us no matter how prepared we feel. And we've already seen the first part of that, the beginning, but the long tail is very steep. just getting in front of that is going to be something that a lot of communities are going to benefit from really, really, really quickly. We're looking at how we might be able to work with local communities to actually workshop this and get to a point where every home and every household and every family has actually got their grab bag ready. Is ready with their resources, with a plan, with an understanding of what are the hierarchy of risks and how they're going to be able to manage those risks. Because risk is a fundamental business consideration. It should be a fundamental consideration for communities and for the people in those businesses and in those communities where they're based as well. No new skills required. Just apply simple risk assessment and appeal to state and local resources like RFS and SES. They have fantastic resources on this. You're not starting from scratch. You bring that discourse into your business, into your operation and organization to say, we need to actually be on top of this because otherwise it's going to catch us off guard. We can be prepared and try and have resources organized in such a way that they can be either deployed or mobilized or even just moved in such a way that they're going to provide defense and security.
I'm fascinated by, in such a polarized environment, how do you build this subculture that you're building in a non-partisan manner that really is focused on fostering hope rather than creating burnout?
Well, yeah, it's not easy, especially in the age of AI. We've got some more headwinds to factor in here. Part of what we're doing is just being the best parents we can be and focusing on the parenting part of our story. Burnout is, increasingly present in people's lives, but we need to make sure we're protecting the people who we need to save the world. And in this case, for our kids, that's their mum and dad or their mums or their dads. It's the people, the carers, the grandparents who are actually looking after them that need to be well. And that's something that absolutely has to come first, no matter what conversation we're having about advocacy, activism, ESG, anything. If we're not strong, it's just not going to be effective. From there, we're also looking at what is the infrastructure that we actually need to be able to have communities organized in a way that will be not just effective in executing and delivering their influence constructively. For example, connecting together, having conversations, meeting people in person, building social bonds, but also as a defense against some of the more pernicious, organized, and very heavily funded vested interests that are using things like AI and social media to impact people in a way social bonds, real people, and local communities can help inoculate against. So we're trying to think about this as a future-proofing exercise for future-proofing our kids' futures. It's complicated, but it's a work in progress, and it starts with one conversation at a time.
You've given us such a great insight into the organization and the way that you approach these challenges. You're bringing so much hope to so many people. I'd love to ask you a personal question, if you don't mind. After all, behind your CEO of Parents for Climate, there is a dad. I'd love to hear how you've managed to balance working through these massive systemic challenges at work, all the climate anxiety, and then managing that with the day-to-day of raising children.
It is a hard question to answer. I don't think I'm necessarily a guru on this. Any parent can probably relate to always wanting to do better. There's an expression I learned overseas when I was doing some work in UNFCCC. And it was this idea that a social movement only needs you when you realize you're not needed by the social movement, which is this strange little cone, this strange little idea that you're meant to consider yourself as non-essential to a social movement in order for it to function effectively. And I found that really helpful to remember that I can't create a situation in which I'm irreplaceable, or that I'm somehow, if I can't keep going, then everything will fall over, because that will happen. And so I need to make sure that there are people around me that I know and that can support me and that are interested in the same outcomes and goals. And that's been the best strategy that I could find, especially trying to build a tiny nonprofit. It's about finding friends who've got your back and being able to take a rest because they're there.
It's amazing. Thanks. Timely, I would say, for a lot of people. Before we jump into the rapid fire, what would you most like our listener to take away from today's conversation?
I think connecting on the level of who you are as a family member, as a parent, as a community member, as a neighbor, those are the ways in which we need to get into a more grounded and more resilient climate conversation. We need business plans and we need political dialogue, but those are part of the constructs. The things that are perhaps more permanent and more vital are the social relationships we have in our own communities, in our own places. So if you've got kids at school, bring it into the school conversation. Say, hey, can we have a conversation about solar and batteries for our school, which is a campaign that we're really proudly prosecuting at the moment. If you've got a sports club, hey, how are we going to deal with the fact that the weather keeps knocking out all of the soccer games? If you've got local community in your own neighborhood, hey, how are we making sure that the more vulnerable members in our street are going to be okay if there's an extreme heat wave or flood that cuts off the roads? These are things that we need to come back to. Because if we're not having conversations about the reality and the practicality of a changing climate in our own social world, we're banking all of our bets on political discourse being resilient and business plans being delivered perfectly. And that's not enough. We need all of it.
Absolutely. And is there any call to action for the listener? How can they join Parents for Climate?
Yeah, please jump on over to parentsforclimate.org and have a look. We've got local groups in every state and territory. We'd love to see you in person. We'd love to connect with you online. We're running all sorts of different initiatives to try and get better outcomes at a local, state, and federal level. In particular, we're really keen to demonstrate as much support as possible for getting solar and batteries onto every school and childcare centre so that they don't just have clean energy and lower bills, but also are ready for whatever's coming into the future so our kids are going to grow up safe.
Nic, it's been such a great conversation. We'd love to end on a quick rapid fire. Do you have one recommendation for our listeners? It could be a book, a podcast, an article, a song.
Wish I had some really deep and meaningful here, but actually I'm just going to tell you what I'm using at the moment, and that's another podcast. They mentioned Parents for Climate, so I'm really happy to mention them. They're called Pop Culture Parenting, and it's a couple of dads, one who's actually quite an expert in dealing with all of the nuances and challenges that come up with raising growing minds, and they are fantastic. They're also quite fun because they review movies through their parenting advice, which is just a fantastic format.
Awesome. Very good. And then who is someone who has inspired you that you think we should have on the Green Fix?
Have you spoken to Claire Snyder?
We have not.
Claire Snyder's really cool. She set up this organization called Climate Integrity, and I think she's doing some really good work, having a very frank conversation about what climate integrity means at a business and government level at the moment. And I think she'd be really great to talk to. I'm inspired by her because she's doing that continuation that we started with this greenwashing case, but actually taking it to all sorts of locations and, the right kind of fields for press and for corporate Australia.
Amazing recommendations. We love ending the episode on a positive note. Can you share one piece of positive climate news with us?
Yeah, there's a lot to share. One of the things that really gives me hope and that I'm reminding people of regularly at the moment is that in the last measured quarter, so Q4 of 2025, we saw renewable energy provide more than 50% of Australia's energy. And that's not just in the East Coast, it's nationally. That's also in Western Australia, because we're seeing a point at which the infrastructure is starting to capture the available energy that's coming from the sun and the wind. We're still growing that now. For me, that's really exciting because I'm always looking for positive tipping points. And that is absolutely one of them.
Yeah, totally agree. And final, if we gave you the Green Fix magic wand so that you could change one thing in the world, what would you do with it?
I think if I could change one thing, it would probably be, look, at the end of the day, at a fiscal level, we do need tax reform. We do need to stop supporting a dominant mode of fossil fuels. That's going to be something that's really important, and ideally leaning into new technologies. I think that that's something everyone can agree with, including the political parties, but no one seems to be able to affect or change. And so I think it does require a magical wand to do overnight. If short of that, we'll be building the public pressure required to create the political will, because it's got to happen, and we've got to stop essentially giving tax write-offs to fossil fuel burning mines or subsidizing or capping the prices of carbon offsets. These are all things that we can just write out of our tax system and make sure we're putting people first.
Amazing. Don't you think it's interesting, Dan? A lot of our guests, we give them the magic wand. They could make fairies appear with the magic wand, but they tend to use it for tax reform.
Yeah.
That's an amazing use of the magic wand. With that, we're going to close out the conversation. It's been such a wonderful conversation. We're so inspired by your work. I'm sure that your impact is amplifying well beyond where you can even imagine. So again, thank you for all the work that you're doing. Thank you for such an insightful conversation. Thank you for joining us on The Green Fix.
Thanks for having me. It's been fantastic.
This was Green Fix with your hosts, Loreto Gutierrez and Dan Levington. You can get your Green Fix every 2 weeks on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Pocket Casts.